This is how you crochet the Jasmine stitch or the daisy puff stitch part 1. I'm going to start this sample with 5 foundation puff stitches. To do that, I'm going to chain 2 and then I'm going to pull out my loop a little bit for the first puff. Now while I'm holding the loops in place on my hook, I want them to be able to travel up and down the hook without losing any of their length. Then I'm going to yarn over and insert my hook into the first chain. Pull up a loop and that makes 3. Yarn over, 4, insert the hook and pull up another loop, 5, yarn over, 6, insert the hook, pull up a loop, 7, and then for the 8th one, I'm going to grab that strand of yarn, and then I'm going to yarn over and pull through all 7 loops on my hook. And then I'm going to insert my hook into the loop I held on to, and then I'm going to add a single crochet. To finish off my first foundation puff stitch, I'm going to chain 1. Now for the second one, I'm going to chain 1, and then I'm going to pull out my loop, yarn over 2, and when I insert my hook, it'll be right there into the center of the single crochet where I pulled all the loops together. Pull up a loop, 3, yarn over, 4, insert the hook and pull up a loop, 5, yarn over 6, insert the hook, pull up a loop, 7, and this time I yarned over first before grabbing the yarn, and then I'm going to pull the yarn through all 7 hooks, insert my hook into the strand I held on to, and add 1 single crochet. Chain 1 to finish it off. And that's 2 of them. I'll do 5 and then I'll post the part 2 in the comments. This is how you crochet the Jasmine stitch or the daisy puff stitch part 2. Now I'm going to be working 3 petals or puffs at a time, so make sure you watch part 1 to understand the background of the puff used here. I'm going to pull out my loop, yarn over for my second loop, insert my hook into the center of the single crochet, pull up a loop 3, yarn over 4, pull up a loop 5, yarn over 6, pull up a loop 7, yarn over 8. So I'm not going to finish here. I'm going to move on to my second gap. I'm going to insert my hook and pull up a loop 1, yarn over 2, pull up a loop 3, yarn over 4, pull up a loop 5, yarn over 6, and then pull up a loop 7, and yarn over 8. Now before I move on to my third gap, I'm just going to count my loops real quick and make sure they're all the same size. I'm looking for 2 sets of 8 loops. And if you like these kinds of close-ups, be sure to like and follow because I post them every day. So I'm going to insert my hook into the next gap and pull up a loop. Yarn over 2, pull up a loop 3, yarn over 4, pull up a loop 5, yarn over 6, pull up a loop 7. Now here comes the fun part. I'm going to put my middle finger right here between the yarn and the loops, wrap my yarn around it by yarning over and pulling the yarn through all 7 loops on my hook. Then I'm going to insert my hook into the loop I created with my middle finger, push them onto my hook, and then I'm going to give it a gentle tug so that I can have the center of my flower. I don't want it to be a big hole, so I'm going to give it a nice tug. Then I'm going to close my stitch with a single crochet and a chain 1. And that's it for part 2. Let me know what you think. I'm putting part 3 in the comments. This is how you crochet the Jasmine stitch or the daisy puff stitch part 3. For the rest of row 2, we're going to be working the exact same way we did in part 2. So instead of giving you detailed instructions on how to do the next section, I thought I could give you some tips on how to start your project using this stitch. So the first thing I want to point out is that the last foundation puff stitch is the first puff stitch of the second row. So whenever you're starting your third row, you're going to want to make just a regular foundation puff stitch with 8 loops. Finish that off before starting your sets of 3. Then if you want to make a blanket, I would recommend using the hook and the yarn that you plan on using for your blanket and making a practice swatch. This is also known as a gauge swatch, and it will help you determine how many foundation stitches you need to start out with. For example, I used 5 foundation puff stitches in this example, but since the 5th one is part of row 2, I'm only going to account for 4 of them. So if this swatch measures 4 inches and I have 4 foundation puff stitches, each puff stitch is going to be 1 inch. And if I want to make a blanket that is 40 inches wide, I would start out with 40 foundation puff stitches plus 1 puff stitch to start my foundation row. And then finally, if you like these kind of close-up crochet stitch tutorials, be sure to like and follow. I post them every single day on my page. And that's it. Happy hooking! This is how you crochet the Jasmine stitch or the daisy puff stitch part 4. I got a lot of questions in part 3, so instead of trying to explain them and risk confusion, I thought I would just film how you finish the 2nd row and start the 3rd row. Finishing the row is not very different from working the rest of the row. We're just going to put our last puff into the first chain of the foundation chain. And then when we turn our work to start the 3rd row or the next row, we are going to just make a regular foundation puff stitch, and that'll be just 1, and then we'll go back and do 3 for the rest of the 3rd row. And if you're ever confused about where to insert your hook to make the puffs, just look for where you would think the center of a flower would be. And that's where the puff stitches are going to be originating out of or going into. So this is the end of row 2, and we're just going to finish it with a single crochet. And then we're going to chain 1 and turn our work to start the foundation puff stitch. So as a little refresher, we're going to pull out our loop, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull up another loop, yarn over again, pull up another loop, and then we're going to hold the yarn, pull through all the loops, insert a single crochet, and that's it. The rest of the row is worked the same way as the 2nd.